I want to talk about podcasts for a while.
Ah,
You mentioned something earlier on saying you hate the word podcaster.
ah.
Why?
I don't know, man. It tends to like denote a lot of things. Like
Into
people
one?
kind of implicitly assume you're into jujitsu or something.
But you are, right?
Yeah, I
So it
mean,
makes sense.
makes sense, right? I
I
don't
am
want.
too.
I'm living
So
the cliche, basically.
makes
Yeah,
sense. So we discussed about this last
yeah,
time. Our love for martial arts and
yeah.
everything around
See,
it.
my idea about podcasting, right? I mean, like this is the most I've spoken on a podcast,
Mm.
right? Like when I do podcasts with guests and so on and so forth, I mostly let them speak. Okay, and I try to intervene as little as possible because I am just scratching my own itch, right? I mean, I have a curiosity as to like how someone has gone from 0 to 1 million in sales, or how someone has built this phenomenal product, or what someone thinks about this weird telecom policy stuff, or whatever it is, right? And so I mean, I just like I think of myself as like a prompt, basically, right? And so I mean, that's all I want to do, right? Versus the podcasters who'll I mean, there are few of them who do it really well. Like I mean, I love Bill Burr, and Bill Burr's Monday morning podcast is
Right.
like phenomenal, right? I mean, his rants are truly legendary, like
Mm.
amazing. Like he's a person I can like listen to endlessly, right? But everyone else, I think, like it's just too much of themselves here. I mean, like every little thing they learned in the day, I mean, can't become like one insight, right? I mean, you have to road test some of this stuff.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, the assumption is, at least from their end, that everything is road tested, and as a function of which, there's great deep insight to impart. But I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I think that's because they're in the content game at large. Like, I'm assuming all of them who make money from content and it is their primary source of income probably tend to get wired that way. I'm assuming you make much more money in your job than you do as a podcaster, right?
I don't make any money
Yeah,
for
exactly. So,
podcasting.
as a function of which for you, and this is the same for me too. I don't make any money for that matter. I think we got a YouTube revenue thing going, but that's like 20 rupees or something the last I checked. So that, well, it explains a lot in terms of how that's not the focus for us. And as a function, you tend to approach it like a normal human being would,
Hmm.
I think, and not
Hmm.
play that game. And I'm having a lot of these conversations with people now about how content creation as a whole has become a very serious profession.
Hmm.
And then now people need to differentiate because they feel that if there's a feeling now that if they're not watching this podcast, they're watching Roshan's.
Hmm.
And as a function, I need to take the view. It's become like a viewership game.
Hmm.
I think it's become like Times Now versus NDTV versus whatever else on prime time.
But it's not like that, you know.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
not
like,
exactly.
I don't know why creators think that way, right? Because see, this morning I seriously ran out of podcasts to listen to. Okay, and
Listen to Rogan on with Chamath.
yeah, I did.
Incredible,
I did.
right?
Nice, very nice,
Yeah.
right?
There's a lot of thoughts which I didn't think. Some of it I touched upon today,
Yeah.
but it came from there in terms of
Yeah.
those the direction of thinking at least. Yeah.
Right. So I literally messaged someone and I said like, hey, can you whatever suggest some podcasts, right? I mean, because the same guy can watch anything, man. I mean, can listen to anything, right? That's not how TV programming works, right? I mean, if you're listening to, if you're watching something between 8 and 8:30, you're watching that at the expense of something else
Yeah.
which is on a different channel at 8 and 8:30, right? But podcasts are positive some that way, right? I mean, I can listen to Lex Friedman, I can listen to like Joe Rogan, I can listen to Smita Prakash, I can listen to anyone, basically, right? And I can listen to it in my time, and I can like jump between all of these, right? So I don't think people need to do that. I mean, but I do feel like the lot of the content gets canned. Okay, I mean, it's just very canned content, right? Because very orchestrated, very like, okay, if I ask this, they will say this, and then that will get like clicks type of thing, right? I mean, which it's okay. I mean, it's fine. I think you need to have some skill to sort of direct conversation towards high engagement content for sure, right? But everything cannot become that, everything cannot be like, oh, if I ask this, they will say this, and then audience will appreciate.
Yeah.
Fuck that. Yeah.
No, I think a lot of people are like that. I mean, see, I do this for a living. I've been doing it for a while. In the early days, I was hands-on in terms of literally looking at every single account, what post goes up, what they're talking to, who they're talking to. And I've done work with celebs, I've done work with brands, all kinds. And for me, when I come down to doing it for myself, I feel I can't look at it that way because I know that is the world of business or the world of marketing where you really need to sell something, right? I think you're trying to essentially get your consumer to pay. I think that's what the function of marketing is.
I'm not saying you should think like a total purist also and say like, fuck what anyone thinks. I'm going to talk about snails for like an hour and a half. I'm not saying that.
But if you do it long enough, people will watch you for being the thought leader on snails.
See, this is exactly the conversation I was having with this friend of mine who we discussed before, right? I said, look, maybe, right, you don't need like hundreds and thousands of people like following whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? You're not selling toothpaste or like you're not selling like hair oil or something like that, right? I mean, I understand if you are, then in that case, I mean, you have to go for like that large consumer number, etc. Right? But if you are authentic enough to like what truly you can offer the world, that only you can, right? Maybe you'll attract a few hundred people who swear by it. And that's all you need, perhaps, right? I mean, like, we tend to think of like numbers as like these large massive numbers, right? Okay, like so and so got, I don't know, so many million views and like whatever, but everything does not have to be millions and millions of views, right? I mean, it depends on like the strength of affinity also, I feel.
I don't know, I think now again this has become a status game. One podcast is saying I have X number of views, X number of subscribers versus the others. I think it's inherently gone into that direction. So everyone wants to thump their chest and say I'm the best. I think it's I feel it's a lot to do with that. And kudos to those who do. I feel I make enough money doing the things I do that genuinely stimulates and motivates me. So I tend to focus on that. And that's the kind of problems I like to solve. I inherently feel if I don't think I'm as passionate about creating content as much as I'm building businesses. Reality. And if that's the case, then it will always be slightly secondary, not that priority. I'm trying to change too. I'm trying different things out. We're trying to see if that will work or no. Incidentally, I was just telling the team also that I was going through my archives, and I would do like 6 to 10 stories a day, okay, on Instagram into 2018, but like pre-COVID. When I was also like exploring everything in the world of marketing, 2 years into probably starting the agency and so forth. Inherently, that excitement is down because I've learned so much. Now, half the things are pattern recognition. So when someone says, oh, AI is a new thing, like I'm like, yeah, cool. I've seen a lot of new things. I'm more excited to see how you implement it rather than hearing, because half the news always is about how something is new, not what someone is doing something with, which is new, which never comes out, right? So I think there's a lot of like, and now I think there's a lot more young people who come onto the internet. There's a lot more of headline reading. There's a lot more of like Twitter itself. I can like, of course, Twitter's changed the algorithm and rightfully so. But if you look at the number of randomness on Twitter, it is always there. But I think now it's just 100x, right? And it's kind of tough.
Now
you
it's
get
the
lost.
Wild West.
Yeah, it's exactly.
Yeah.
But it's unique, so it works, I guess.
Yeah.
You don't get that experience on Instagram, so you don't mind logging into Twitter every single time.
You can still curate your feed to some extent.
For sure.
To some extent, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you can still curate your feed.
No, it gives you suggestions in terms of the genres that you want to follow and so forth. But I think,
look, I much rather prefer that compared to like, let's say Instagram, where I have no idea what comes up on my feed. You know, zero. Right? It's not even in my control. I feel.
I don't know, when did Reels start? 2021, I guess.
After
COVID,
Reels
right?
was a TikTok phenomena, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and TikTok was a 2019 sort of a thing.
TikTok got banned in 2020. So
2018, I think. 2018, 2019.
No,
or
I
maybe
think,
even
no.
even earlier than
IGTV
that.
was the thing in 2018-19.
No. Instagram followed TikTok, right?
Yeah.
I think TikTok had Reels in 2017.
No, I think, but
2018.
I think Reels came in only after TikTok got banned, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, perhaps
so
in 2020.
I don't know. Sam, can you look up? Yeah, I'm right. Okay.
Yeah.
So 2020, I think it gets banned. 2021, I think Reels come in. And I remember the first week on Instagram, they would send Reels your way, right? I would click, I'd say not interested. Click not, because I just inherently don't like consuming vertical content. And at least at that time, I feel short form. I can watch maybe 2 shorts at a go. After that, I can't.
Right.
I'm just, I don't know, I'm blessed, I think, because I did a video.
Dude, you're like truly fortunate. Okay. This is me on a holiday, okay? It's like, okay? And then like an hour later, like, oh, fuck. You know? I'm so pissed with myself that I got tricked by this algorithm, right? I'm just like doom scrolling like for an hour,
Yeah.
not doing
So
jack shit. It's not like I'm going to be building rockets or whatever, but hey, I could have taken a walk or something.
I don't follow too many people on across all platforms. YouTube is the only place where that happens to me, where I'm going in and it's like TV. I look at it like TV. Whatever comes my way, I'll watch it.
Yeah.
And or I'll save it for later.
YouTube has been awesome, man.
Yeah.
I'll tell you. Like they have, I don't know, their algorithm doesn't work well for music for me specifically because I think compared to Spotify, right? Here is YouTube algorithms for music. Okay, you listen to the song. Why don't you listen to it another 100 times? That's their algorithm in like a nutshell. Whereas I mean, Spotify is like, okay, you listen to this song, you might like these 3 other songs.
No, YouTube has that.
Right?
Even in
So, but with content recommendations, I think YouTube nails it. Like YouTube absolutely nails it. Sometimes I click on stuff that, like I'm like halfway through it, I'm thinking, how did you know that I like this stuff?
this is fresh things, or like something I never watched before.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think I said this on a podcast in 2021, I think, or 2020, that I'd never had notifications on any social platform.
Yeah, me too.
Since 2016. Maybe around in between I would have had for 1 or 2 platforms here and there, but otherwise I didn't. Inherently, I would not follow more than people who are actually people who I know, and maybe some sportsmen and people who play for my favorite team and stuff like all that. Apart from that, none. I just liked that. I didn't like noise, let's put it that way. And very early in my work here, I realized that social media can get really distracting if you don't know how to use it, and it can fry your attention span.
Yeah.
And that's happened now because of, I think we call it the TikTokification of social media.
Yeah.
Everything has become based as a response to what TikTok did.
Dude.
Right?
I mean, it's like a massive dopamine hit, right? And
Massive.
Even with I mean, even as a creator as well, right? I mean, like, you have to maintain some distance between what you've done and how people are reacting to it. Otherwise, I mean, you're checking that new video or that new reel every 30 minutes. Yeah. Tough. And having like a reaction to it as well, right? So
you take this, right, which is lowering our attention span, inability to watch movies without a break, inability to listen to a complete song at sometimes. People get excited and they want to move to the next. Combine all of that lack of patience, that I call it, probably as a right term, and then combine that with what ChatGPT will do to you, where you can get everything instantly without actually digging in deep and burying yourself in data, trying to mine it out. What's the future like then? Because
scary, man.
Yeah, it is. I don't know if it's scary. I in some ways I look at it and think, oh, great opportunity, because I feel if you're wired in the right way, then you might be able to navigate these circumstances. But
see, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know really. See, like I said, right? I mean, we're missing all of the things that we learn in the process. In the process of finding that gully, or in the process of like finding that piece of information or so on, we're missing everything that we learn along the way. Okay. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily like a great thing, I don't know really. I mean, which is why, I mean, you have so much of anxiety, right, today about random things like anxiety, depression, so on and so forth, right? Because it's just a mismatch in expectations. I mean, like, barring like the few chemical imbalances that, one can have inherently, right? I mean, otherwise it's just a mismatch in expectations. I mean, I can give you the best thing in the world, but if you expected something that was 10% better, I mean, you would be disappointed.
Right.
And that's just what happens.
We won't go more into it. There's a lot of uncertainty there. But do you think AI podcasts are real? They could happen? I recently watched something where there were two, I don't know, I just saw a clip, so I don't know the exact depth of it, but it was a scenario where it was AI basically in conversation with each other, two AI, and then they learn in the course of the episodes that they are actually AI and not real. And it's about AI epiphany, I guess. Which is, I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched a little bit and I'm like, I don't know if it's real or faked. So I was like, I probably skipped. But it opened up a reality to the fact that tomorrow you could have, and this is something again we covered a lot in some of the earlier episodes, which is, this is a real thing that if you can really create, I think some people generally are shy of camera, right? Let's put it that way. And they don't want to be out there speaking and probably have conference issues. It's a great hack for them because these are people who are in the past creating audio podcasts and they can now create video with the help of an AI generated image or a visual, and it solves for a lot.
Yeah, there's definitely possibilities, right? I mean, I think there's all these different apps that can help you generate your own avatar and like, you train it on a few minutes of content and it can like, be you for whatever you want to sell or speak, right? I mean, for sure. I don't know, man. I mean, like, I think there's inherently something human that we look forward to in podcasts. I mean, like, look at that conversation with Joe Rogan and Chamath, okay? I don't think you can script something like that, you know? I don't think that's a very bounded conversation, right? I mean, because they go off on all sorts of tangents.
Yeah.
Now, you can train the AI on, like, all 2,000 episodes of Joe Rogan and say, like, you know what? Speak like this or generate a podcast like this with so and so and so on, right? But it's going to miss those, like, leaps of like fantasy, right, or whatever. I mean, sure as hell the AI is not going to have like, is not going to get those smelling salts and whatnot and get people to sniff it, right, for sure, right? I mean, or some other kind of quirks. I think the quirks make us human, and that's also what we look forward to without understanding, I think.
Also, podcasts are typically benched against the guests who have some kind of real world merit, right, and real world validation. Sure, so I feel the real world validation is one reason why someone watches a podcast. The second one is the fact that they like their speaking style or they like their style of conversation, which helps them learn or take something away back in return. Now, the second things can be solved for because I feel you can generate an AI that has different tonality, different style of communication, and then people would take to it. But can you replicate that real world validation? You can't.
Dude, we're speaking at a time where I can tell you for a fact, right? Just understanding, like whatever little understanding I have about human psychology, I can hazard a guess and tell you that perhaps 5% of like the profiles on OnlyFans are all bots, right? AI or bots or whatever you call it, right? And they're making bank, right? And I have a sneaking suspicion that the people who are fans or whatever of those certain profiles, they probably know, right? They're still like, spending money on it. Maybe OnlyFans is like an extreme example. Maybe, I mean, we will get to a point where folks will idolize certain AI avatars with certain unique characteristics and so on. Maybe that'll happen, right? I don't know how far off that is. I mean, maybe like 5 years or 10 years. I mean, look at all this, like, what was that, man? NFTs, right? Bizarre, right? Like 30 lakhs or 40 lakhs for some piece of like ones and zeros.
Yeah.
Completely bizarre. But people put a price on that, right?
I minted a few free NFTs just to learn what it is about, the process. I think great technology, great scope, not foolproof now.
No, but so the thing is that people will put a premium on things, right? I mean, they'll figure, right? So
I think in a world where AI is dominant and it's the core of everything you do from a technology lens, I think blockchain has a big role to play there.
Yeah.
Because I think it can verify a lot. It can act as a fail-safe in a lot of ways.
The fact that you can authenticate a transaction, like uniquely, is
you can authenticate everything essentially, right? By the same technology.
Like, so it's obviously like an order of magnitude invention.
We just need to figure out how to counter the environmental factors.
Yeah.
Which would definitely be a huge risk.
I think, like, no matter what we do, we just come back to AI, man. I think it's like it's pulling us in that direction.
Help it. I think I agree. We should
do
something.
Maybe AI from the future is orchestrating this conversation. Right? Who knows?
I really, really wish and hope not. Yeah. Do you watch Indian podcasters?
Listen or watch?
Both, either.
Sometimes, yeah, sure.
You listen more than watching?
I listen more than watching.
Same. But is it YouTube or is it on Apple or Spotify? Or
Spotify.
Okay.
Spotify.
You seem a Spotify loyalist. Music.
For no reason other than the fact that I use an Android phone, right? But I don't watch videos on Spotify though. I mean, I consume the audio podcasts. And on YouTube, I mean, I catch some of these clips and so on.
Any podcasters that have caught your attention and you absolutely love and they're your
Indian
podcasters?
Indian podcasters.
Yeah.
I think what Smita Prakash has done for politics and policy is like phenomenal stuff. Like really amazing. And if you think about her, right? I mean, she's like an old school journalist who's adapted to this very new medium
Yeah.
and has like really hit it out of the park. Startup wise, there are a bunch of folks who are doing like some reasonably good content, very good content, I should say. Whether it's Neon or 100x, was previously called 100x, Indian Silicon Valley, run by this guy called Jivraj.
Yeah.
Bunch of folks who are generating good content on the startup front, right? Who else? The media folks have like this 5-minute brief kind of thing, which I don't know. I mean, I sometimes if I want to quickly understand like X or Y things, I mean, I find it useful, but otherwise, I mean, like not really my thing.
That's your style is more raw, right? You like to consume conversations rather
I like
than
long form conversations, right? And it's also because of a very functional thing. I mean, generally when I put on a podcast, I mean, like I'm either going out for a walk or like I'm working out or I'm doing some chores or something of that sort, which typically take about 30 minutes at least, to say the least. And I don't want to have to like switch things up, right? I mean, I don't have to like look at my phone 3 times and like change things. So I prefer like 45-minute, 1 hour, 1.5 hour conversations. And of course, I mean, I listen to Joe Rogan, so which is like 3 hours and so on.
Yeah. I'm assuming you break them up and then you watch and you listen to them. You can't
very
rarely go.
That too. I just don't want to have to change things as much. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
We touched upon.
But Indian podcasters, sorry, I mean, I also have to give a shout out to Vinamra Kasana. He's a good guy.
I haven't followed. What
Those cast.
Right? Oh, okay.
Has some really good guests on the on his channel. Yeah, interesting content for sure.
Got it. So you've been doing this now for 4 years. Do you have a mantra or do you have like a code in which is your approach to it? For example, if you have an episode, you prepare for it in a certain way, or if you have a guest, you read up about his or her past in a certain way. Like, is there some kind of a definitive process that you have?
See, I look at myself as producing quite niche content, okay? I mean, so this might not work for like, everyone per se, right? But I just try to understand the context in which someone exists, right? I mean, like I don't know, if I'm talking to a founder, I try to understand a bit more about their company, and then get deeper into like what perspectives they have. And typically, I mean, you'll find that on Twitter or LinkedIn or so on. Sometimes, I mean, you get these folks who are like absolute black boxes, right? I mean, there's nothing, right? There's nothing on them online. In which case, I mean, you just look at their background, their experience, and kind of hazard a guess in terms of like, okay, this is perhaps what they might have been thinking, or so on and so forth. I think of a podcaster as like being a director, man. I mean, like being an orchestrator, right? So you need to figure like, how do you get the best content out of people? Great conversation is definitely necessary, but it's not sufficient by itself. So you also have to think from the perspective of like, how can you prompt the most interesting answers from people, right? I mean, like, that's okay, right? I mean, it's okay to think of it that way, but I don't think you should think overly index one way or another. Like, I'll just have a conversation and like, fuck it, people like what they like. Or, I mean, be so like hardwired to, you know what, people are going to like this or not, like this or not. I mean, like every sentence and every paragraph is like studied and like you're being very judicious about those things. I think it has to lie somewhere in the middle, right? So yeah, I mean, you read up about the context and you ask the kind of context, I mean, you ask the kind of questions that you are genuinely curious about, right? So what I also will do is like look at some of their other podcasts that they've done before.
I was just going to ask you.
And think of follow-ups to some of the questions they've answered already. So that's one thing. And also, you know, before we start, I also ask them, right? I mean, are there like 2 or 3 of your favorite stories that you want to tell, right? Which you'll tell on every podcast, right? Because obviously it's an opportunity for them to kind of showcase what they're thinking as well, right? I mean, so that's fine. And I'll ask the flip also, right? Is there something that you've spoken about enough number of times that you absolutely don't want to touch upon, right? And they'll have an answer for that as well. So, yeah.
Understood. I was going to ask you about this process of watching them on other podcasts, which is I've consciously not done that, especially if it is somebody I'm sort of sitting down and speaking to for the first time, because I wanted to be as authentic. And sometimes you get to hear something from another show or a podcast, and then you some inherently aren't as curious or as excited as you could be or would have been. So I tend to not do it. The other thing I don't do, like for that matter, is not share a very structured agenda or questions, because I feel not having something too rigid helps you to be fluid and be more real and authentic. Again, that being the mantra. How do you do it? Because I know you also get some important people on who sometimes are protected by corporate communication. They can't really honestly speak everything that they want to.
Right.
How do you manage that scenario?
It's a balance, man. I mean, like, look, there are one thing I've realized after doing as many podcasts, people generally tend to like these maybe even if not questions, I mean, like an outline of like where the conversation is headed, right? I mean, they don't want that ambiguity. I mean, like, God knows you'll open up with like, what is your favorite, like, I don't know, sex position or something of that sort, right? I mean, fuck knows. So
have you been on podcasts where that's happened?
Thankfully not, right? But yeah, I mean, people want to know what to expect, right? They don't like ambiguity, for sure, right? So I mean, it's always helpful, and people like that to various degrees, right? I mean, some of them may just like an outline. Some of them will want like deep questions in terms of what you're going to ask, and some of them will want even more, right? I mean, they want to like get on a prep call and like talk about, hey, this is what I'm going to be saying. What will you say to that, and so on and so forth. Thankfully, very, very, very few of them insist on that, right? But yeah, people appreciate like an outline of questions. I mean, yeah, it's helpful. But what I realize is once you have the conversation, I mean,
it goes out of the
window. It goes everywhere, right?
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to touch upon is that one thing I really liked when I looked at your podcast is that it's true to its nature, where I don't think you're doing the gimmicks or the kind of extra, say, I'm trying to look for the right term, and not authentic, but let's say you don't put in suspense or hooks or say do those unnecessary interruptions just for the sake of it, to keep people hooked.
You know that Steve Carell meme, right? I mean, he's getting congratulated by this guy, right?
No, I'll tell you why I said that.
I kind of feel like that right now, I mean,
no, I'll tell you why I touch upon it, because I feel, and I know this because we do this work for brands, because everything's a metric game. Like, every single thing is about metrics. Like, if you don't hit X number of followers, and even if you're like, say, 2 followers below the number, it's a failure. And it's all, and I think we inherently in our society are so comfortable with chasing marks, right? That's how we've all grown up, and that same thing has now come to the corporate world too. Now we're chasing metrics like we used to chase marks. So if you have to get if it's 100 marks, then if you get 98, it's a failure. Like, it's a bit like that, right? Even though you were aiming for 95. There's a bit of that I think has taken over the content creation domain as a whole, where I think, like we were just discussing about a friend of yours, everything has become about that element of status, right? So people try to do anything and everything to get that extra click. And I noticed that for whatever reason you don't, and I think it maps back to that same point that we spoke of, which is you're not trying to sell something.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to sell, man. I mean, it's not like we partner with a lot of these brands also.
Ever considered making course or doing something like that?
No. I mean,
never attracted you?
Somehow this course thing just seems a little shady to me, okay? Maybe I'll change my mind at some point of time if I think that I can add genuine value to someone, right? But I feel like at the very least it's an internship, right? Like, I can't like teach you a course and you will just like go through those 6 video lectures and then you'll become like a champ at something, right?
Have you tried to hire through the podcast?
Hire through the podcast?
Yeah.
I mean, like, this is, I mean, I'm not trying to brag or something, but nearly everyone I've interviewed have seen me on the podcast. Nearly everyone. Like, interview, meeting, so on and so forth.
It used to happen a lot to me maybe a couple of years ago. I had a different show initially I used to do, which is far more non-scripted and unprepared this way, but it was basically just we would pick questions out of a lot and I would answer them
We
as
should
long
do
as
that.
they're centric to our work. And at that time I would get, because I think they inherently, but I think I stopped doing that because I feel there's enough help content out there. And ChatGPT negates the need for you to go and
No,
watch.
dude. See, sometimes you have to listen to it over and over again. Look, I mean, everything that's perhaps required from a philosophical perspective, right? I mean, are answered by the epics, right? I mean, whether you take our Indian epics, Mahabharata or Ramayana, or some of the Upanishads or whatever it is. I mean, like, there's pretty much the world's wisdom summarized in those books, right? Or you take like the Greek or the Roman literature, whatever it is. I'm not familiar with those, but I'm sure, right? I mean, if you look at some of the Stoic stuff and everything, I mean, there's tons and tons of value that's like already been spoken about. But I think the thing with humans is that different people relate to different things very differently, right? You and I may look at the same passage and have entirely different reactions, right? And so it's necessary for all of these things to be retold a million different ways, right? A bunch of people had to listen to Naval Ravikant, right, to get some of the other stuff that he leverages on, right, whether it's Buddhism or like whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And that's just how it is. Like, a bunch of people had to listen to Tim Ferriss to get like his predecessors, right? I mean, and so on and so forth, right? So I think sometimes the message has to be repurposed a million different ways for a million different people to relate to it.
True. It's a very good insight. How did you go about getting your first guest?
The first few guests were all like hustle, like a lot of hustle.
Was it easy?
Actually, the first few guests were like people I knew already, right? The guests beyond that, I mean, like, were hustle. I mean, I had to cold email, I had to DM, so on and so forth. And then it just got easier with time, right? I mean, like, after about 400 podcasts, I mean, like, you have some credibility, right? I mean, like, so now it's like marginally less difficult for me to reach out to that next guest and like produce that next episode as such. Yeah.
So was it using the credibility built with the former guest going to the next and then going to the next?
It certainly helps if you have some famous people on your podcast, okay? I mean, because that's just like reflected glory, right? I mean, because I've interviewed, whether it is Sridhar Vembu or Balaji Srinivasan or Rory Sutherland or whoever, I mean, there is some credibility, right? I mean, if those people have like found it worth their time to like speak to me, hopefully, right? I mean, like, it should be good enough for
Sutherland was the first. Yours was the first Indian podcast where I saw him.
Rory Sutherland.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know if he's done many Indian shows or
hasn't
podcasts,
done a lot.
Yeah. But
In fact, I mean, I just emailed him like a couple of weeks back, okay, about some random question. I mean, once in a while I go on these Rory binges, okay, where I have to like sort of take myself out of like the Newtonian world, as he calls it, right, and I have to like think in his world, right? I mean, like psychologic, as he calls it in Alchemy, his book, right? And I just emailed him about some random thought, and he was kind enough to reply, and we went back and forth. Like, yeah, I mean, he's
is he
just
active?
an amazing guy.
Like he responds?
Yeah, man. Like,
Crazy.
he does. Oddly enough,
Very interesting. No, I love his talks.
he's amazing.
And in fact, I think the last time we sat down before that, I was listening to one of his latest speeches, and amazing stuff. Like every time you listen to him, you learn something and come out of it.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, he is. So I've never been like a guy who does this note-taking business with podcasts and stuff. I mean, it's not like, I mean, I just like pause, reflect, write it down, etc. I mean, I think that's one thing where books are better than podcasts, I suppose. I mean, books at least, I mean, I always like highlight and stuff like that. But podcasts, I just find it tedious. I mean, I do take some notes sometimes. But Rory is one person who I always like to take notes, right? Whatever he says, right? Because it's just fundamentally mind altering. Fundamentally, like he says, right? I mean, the opposite of a good idea can be another good idea. Think about that, right?
Yeah.
So stuff like that.
Yeah, I thought about taking notes early in the podcast journey, and then I was just thinking back to it. I personally love taking notes. That's the way I remember. But then I was just thinking like that. Imagine a guest speaking, and I'm like, hold on a second, I want to make a note. And then at times it would just interrupt the flow. So then I
Yeah.
thought, okay, maybe not. We tried, and then I also my thought was, if I really need to take notes, I can go back and watch this.
Yeah.
And if,
No, I meant taking notes while listening to
Yeah.
podcasts, not like yeah. I mean, that would be weird to like
yeah.
talk to someone.
No,
and,
but there are people who do it. There are people who take notes while a podcast is on.
I mean,
know a few.
I write down stuff. Sometimes I've done that, right? But yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm like
Tough.
scribbling like
Yeah.
reams of like
Yeah.
on reams of paper as we speak. That would be weird. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your top advice to podcasters who are trying to sharpen their speaking skills? What are the ways to sort of get ahead there?
2, 3, right? So one is obviously listen to your favorite podcasters, like listen to them over and over again, and see beyond the content, right? Try to study the craft a little bit, like think about how they, position questions, how they articulate, how they move the conversation from one to another. I think that really helps, right? And note down these nuances, I mean, just note them down for your own sake and look at it once a while. I think that. Second, I would say, like, listen to yourself. It's perhaps the most irritating thing in the world to have to listen to yourself again and again, because I'm sure, like, if you're someone who is even slightly conscientious, I mean, you will find like 100 things that you would do differently, right? But absolutely listen to yourself. I mean, that's one of the ways you can get rid of all these verbal tics and so on, right? I still say so on and so forth a lot, right? But I'm very conscious of it. So listen to yourself over and over and over again. And third, I would say, like, look, there are certain things you just have to accept, okay? In the old days, when I started the podcast, I would write down full sentences and read those, right? And at some point I said, look, I'm going to trust myself to figure the end of that question, okay? And if I don't, well, fuck it. You know what? I'm going to start over again. It's okay, right? And there are certain things like that you have to accept. Like, I've accepted that, I'm going to say so on and so forth.
Yeah,
It's fine.
I say
Okay?
right a lot.
As long as it's not like some debilitating thing and, it's literally Tourette's or whatever, and it becomes like hard to listen to, I mean, it's fine. It's fine, right? So I think accept those little quirks that you may have, and don't try to become a Tim Ferriss or a Joe Rogan or, Lex Friedman or someone else, right?
That's very important, right? Not to be somebody else.
See, podcasts, I think, by itself is like a very unique endeavor, right? I mean, you are speaking to someone. It's not like a television production thing, right? Where, pretty much like you're like a man on the screen and you're saying things that, your producer or your director or someone else has like sort of is channeling through you, right? It's a very unique endeavor in that sense, right? So, yeah, it is very individualistic.
Right.
Yeah. And you see this, right? I mean, like, the same person can go on 2 different podcasts, and you'll get like different conversations with that, right?
True.
I mean, you listen to Rick Rubin on Joe Rogan versus Rick Rubin on Lex Friedman. It's different. I mean, there is an overlap for sure, but it's also different.
And that's also the identity of the host, right? Your ability to channel the conversation in a particular direction.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a reflection of that too.
I mean, I'm sure there's absolutely no way to replicate this conversation.
True.
I mean, it's the second time we're speaking, and, how much of overlap is there between this conversation and the previous conversation we had? Like, I think zilch.
Yeah.
Perhaps some in the introduction.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, but that's also the uniqueness, right? It's hard to script and read it out.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And then that's like, I think the fact that you can't do that by default makes it unique every single time.
Makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. But I think the first one to the second one, I feel we are a lot more pointed in terms of our questions and answers, even though it is quite well-rounded in terms of the topics that we would have covered. but I feel that first time we also got to know each other through those interactions. So this is a little
Spoke
bit
about
more
plenty
refined.
of random things.
Yeah. But I think that was a podcast for you and I about each other.
Yeah.
More than anything else.
Yeah, I think it was just a random conversation that was also recorded.
Yeah, more or less. But yeah, a lot, and we spoke about this factor also, that a lot of these podcasts that have started out early days, if you go back to their first 5-6 episodes, they are quite random. They are quite, with their friends and stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, today a lot of media houses are getting into it, and a lot of people are getting into creating a show from the go. It's not a podcast; it's a show, and hence it's very different.
Yeah.
And I think you are by just the nature of the fact that you've decided to now play it as a show, you need to be a little bit more refined and polished than others.
Yeah.
There's this great extract I found many years ago. It said there are 3 types of media. There's one which is coming to you from authority and establishment. Then it comes from the link. So an authority and establishment is a company, is the government, is any kind of institution. The second one comes to you from media, which is reporters, newspaper, whatever else it is doing it, who's taking the information and sort of translating it to the rest, and who are sometimes seen as gatekeepers, right? Like how we look at newspapers and media houses. And then there's a third form, which is very raw, it's authentic, it is no nonsense, and it comes from the folks on the street who have the feet on street, and they're giving you the actual interpretation of what it is. So it depends on where you want to play as a podcast. I think today's day and age, I think it's enabled you to either start on the ground and just capture raw emotions of anyone and everyone who's sort of has an opinion on that topic, or you can go up the ladder and make it far more refined and polished. And I think that's something that's happened as a function of just media landscape changing.
Yeah. See, you can either be the best or the most unique. Okay? When I say most unique, I mean, I'm not saying that you'll talk about snails for like an hour and a half, right? But, I mean, at least have a different perspective, right? You can either be the best or the most different, I feel. And look, I mean, human beings are naturally curious about different perspectives. I mean, that's why as many perspectives exist, right? And for centuries and centuries, like news as we, see it, or information has been like utterly like chaotic, right? I mean, it's what you heard from your neighbors, it's what you heard from your friends, so on and so forth. So this centralized top-down media is like a 20th century phenomena, okay? And it's probably like it's done its time, right? It's over, right? I mean, like even the most like the biggest TV nut today doesn't believe everything they see on television, right? I mean, there's a second, third, fourth opinion that someone gets either in real life or on social media, etc., right? So you're not relying on someone to parse that information for you. I mean, you're using different sources to sort of do that for yourself, right? Which is a little more effort on your part, but I mean, it's more accurate, right?
True.
So,
right.
Yeah.